coming to find out about the tax scam. And it's a tax cut that passed the House and the Senate, was signed into law within about 5 weeks of the time that the legislation was introduced. And it had no Democratic support because none was solicited, because none was needed. And so basically they just rammed this thing through in the space of 5 weeks. And there are a couple of congressmen who are on the record as having said before passage that, you know, if we don't get this thing done, then we're going to lose all of our donors. Or my donors have told me to don't call them if we don't get this thing passed. And so it was the Republican donors who were instrumental and adamant about passing this tax code, or this tax scam, this tax cut. And those funders, those GOP funders, they are maybe 10 to 12 families who contribute hundreds of millions of dollars every year to elect Republicans. And they decided that if we don't get what we paid for, then we're not going to pay for it anymore. We're going to deprive you of your contributions. So therefore, the Republicans complied and passed this tax scam. And I'll go into that in just a second. But I do want to recognize the public officials who are present tonight. And they are Councilwoman Diana Doma from Stonecrest, City of Stonecrest, and also Councilman Rob Turner, Stonecrest City Council. Did I miss anybody? Okay, all right, good. So good to see everyone. We are here tonight with 3 experts who are going to tell us their opinions and their analysis of the tax scam. And to be respectful, I'll just call it the tax cut. I'm being respectful, but it is a tax scam because it was sold as a middle-class tax cut. That's what they said it was going to do. It's going to be a middle-class tax cut, but it is not a middle-class tax cut, and I'll explain that, and the panelists will tell you about it from their perspectives. But without taking a lot of time to introduce them, I will say that we have Mrs. Lucia Smill, who is the Georgia State Clinical Assistant Professor in Accounting. And she'll speak on what the GOP tax plan means for the economy over the long term. And we also have Katie Foster, who's the Executive Director of Atlanta North Georgia Labor Council, the AFL-CIO, will speak on what the tax plan means for workers. And also Mr. William Lyle, who is an accounting instructor and advisor at the Georgia Piedmont Technical College, who will speak to us on planning strategies associated with the proposed GOP tax increases and decreases. And so, with no further ado, I do want to talk to you a little bit about the tax scam, but I want to put it into a historical perspective because everyone remembers the Great Recession, which hit in September of 2007, right as Barack Obama was about to win the presidential election. You'll recall it was during the campaign, right around the end of September, and John McCain suspended his campaign and went back to Washington to address the recession. But when he got back, he said, "Well, what do we do now?" You know, he didn't have a plan. He just, you know, and so you remember how Barack Obama kind of came in and basically you know, tried to settle everything down at that crucial time, but he went on and won the election. Everybody was elated. You remember the crowds out in Chicago, and you remember when he was inaugurated, inauguration day. Did any of y'all go to the inauguration? Raise your hands. And you remember all of the crowds and everything, and everybody, I'm sure, watched it on TV or saw some part of it. It was a very historic moment. The nation elected its first African-American president. And despite how in the dumps the economy was, there was hope about the future. And so this Great Recession was largely caused by subprime loans and defaults under those loans. 8.7 million jobs were lost, unemployment went to 10%, and American families lost $16 trillion in net worth. Do y'all remember that? Yeah. Y'all remember the foreclosures and the losing 800,000 jobs a month as President Bush left office? I mean, it was the nation was really in a tough situation. So to stabilize the banking system, because those subprime mortgages were packaged into securities and sold on Wall Street and around the world, until such time as people realized that due to the growing number of defaults, defaults were just running rampant, and people who were holding that paper finally realized that the mortgages, the high risk and high payday mortgages, because they were making like 10% on those securities, those bundles of subprime mortgages, and then people who purchased the securities were making like 10% on that, until they woke up and saw that, okay, this is basically a non-performing asset, because, it was just worthless paper. And so, boom, the bottom fell out. Lehman Brothers went belly up. Countrywide, all of these other investment banks and Sachs, Goldman Sachs, all of them started really, the ground was shaking. It was an earthquake. And so the banking sector had to be saved with what was known as the Wall Street bailout. Everybody remembers the $700 billion Wall Street bailout, which was given to the banks to try to stabilize the situation. And so what the banks did, and I voted against the $700 billion bailout, not because I didn't think that the banks needed to be bailed out, but because I did not think that there was adequate restrictions and requirements on how they would spend that money, how the banks that got the money would spend it. And sure enough, what they did, the banks got the money, ended up buying out the smaller, weaker banks. And so the too big to fail banks got even bigger. They're even bigger today than they were back then, too big to fail. And so we gave the banks the bailout, it stabilized the system, and under the leadership, that happened before President Obama came in. When he came in, we passed a Main Street bailout. It was the $787 billion bailout for the bottom 99%. So you basically had $700 billion given to the 1% with no restrictions on it. Then you had $787 billion split up basically in stimulus programs that were designed to create jobs and get the economy moving again. So putting $787 billion into the economy and giving it to state and local governments to do the shovel-ready projects and other things. And so based on that $787 billion direct federal spending bailout, The nation bottomed out of the Great Recession in March of 2009 and started creating jobs thereafter. About 73, 74 straight months of positive job growth under President Obama. So basically, we lost 8.7 million jobs in the Great Recession. And by the time Barack Obama left office, we had created 9 million new jobs. And so basically, with President Obama being the president that Mitch McConnell said we're going to do everything to make him a one-term president, remember that? Yeah. That was right after his inauguration, like within days of the first inauguration, Mitch McConnell said we're going to make him, my goal is to make him a one-term president. Now how were they going to do that? They were going to oppose everything that he proposed. And that is exactly what they did. But despite that, Democrats were in control at that time. 2006 to 2010 was the period that Democrats had a majority in the House and Senate. By 2008, 2 years after Obama got in, the Senate flipped to the Republicans. And then in 2010, the House flipped to the Republicans. So President Obama only had 2 years to do what needed to be done to save this economy and get it on the right track. And that's exactly what he did. And in addition to that, which is not the topic of this conversation today, but did the Affordable Care Act to put 34 million people who did not have access to the healthcare system, put them in the system. 34 million people. They're still trying to kill that for some reason. They just don't have the same values that Democrats have. So that climb out of the recession, ladies and gentlemen, was long and difficult. The Republicans said that it was a weak recovery, the weakest recovery that we've ever had, but they were the ones standing in the way of everything to keep it moving. And so finally, when Trump gets into office, now he's taking credit for all of the stuff that President Obama and Democrats put into place that Republicans obstructed. You know, and it's no doubt that things are going much better than they had been. Even, I mean, the 1%, they never did. Once they got that $700 billion, they never looked back. They've been moving forward. The stock market has gone from like 6,000, it went up to 26,000 just about a week and a half ago. But now it's kind of going back down a little bit, but the reason is that the top 1%, that's their money that's circulating up there. They decided to just take it out and put it into something safer. They may put it into real estate, which will cause values to go back up. Do y'all know that a lot of us here in South DeKalb have not come from underwater yet? That's part of the wealth that we, how much was it? We lost, gosh, I think I said 17 trillion. Yeah, but some folks still have not recovered yet. We are among them. I'm still waiting on my house, on my values to get just a little bit further up so I can be out from underwater. And I can maybe look at refinancing without having to bring some money to the closing table. But that's where we are. So we pretty much have been growing. And that is the background that I want to give you to get to this point, to fast forward to this point when the economy is doing well. It's growing now at about 2.9%, 4% growth is the goal. I mean, when you're growing at 4%, you know, it's a sustainable, for America, an economy the size of America, it's a sustainable growth rate. You can achieve that every year. I mean, you can, that's reasonable, 4%. And we're climbing out. We're at 2.9%, unemployment is down to about 4%, 4.1%, and things are coming along now. And so, boom, all of a sudden the Republicans decide that it's time for a tax cut for the top 1%. And so, as a strategy of governance and keeping the economy moving forward, one of the things that you want to do, you want to have the ability to do a tax cut to stimulate the economy when it needs to be stimulated. So while the economy is already growing and you throw in an unnecessary tax cut, you're throwing away that tool in the toolbox that you might need later on down the line. And you're also planting the seeds for there to be irrational exuberance in the stock market, which we've seen already. So, you know, we're at the point now where we need to ask ourselves, why would we give the top 1% a $5.8 trillion tax cut? 83% of that $5.8 trillion goes to the top 1%. 83% of $5.8 trillion. Permanent tax cuts for the top 1%. Now, they also imposed some revenues to go along with the cut. So in other words, they increased taxes to pay for the tax cut. So the 5.8 trillion in tax cuts was offset by $4.3 trillion in tax increases. Now the tax increases are on the incomes of the bottom 99% over the next 10 years. Whereas the top 1%, their tax cuts are permanent, and they got 83% of the 5.8 trillion. So that also left a debt or a deficit of 1.5 trillion. So $1.5 trillion added to the national debt. And so this is pretty much where we are, ladies and gentlemen. And so if nobody in here paid a corporate tax rate of 35%, which is reduced down to now 21%, this tax cut was not for you. Was there anybody in here that was paying a corporate tax of 35%? And by the way, even though that was the top rate, not many corporations could be caught paying 35% because they had so many loopholes in the tax code that enabled them to not have to pay taxes. Many corporations, particularly multinationals, don't pay any taxes. And but the effective rate for most corporations that do pay taxes is about 19%. That was their effective rate. But because the loopholes in this so-called comprehensive tax reform bill remain, they didn't get rid of any of the loopholes. Loopholes are still there, so therefore that effective tax rate will come down. So none of you will need to be burdened by those technicalities, but I'll ask, is there anybody who was paying a 39% tax on your individual income? Because if you were, then you would get a tax cut permanent down to 37%. But again, you know, most wealthy individuals who are subject to the 39% tax did not pay that tax because they had all of those loopholes in the tax code. So if you didn't have to pay if you didn't have an estate that generated what they call the death tax, but it's actually an estate tax. If you didn't own an estate that was $5.5 million or more as an individual, then you won't benefit from the upping of that amount to $11 million per individual that would be not subject to the inheritance tax. So, you know, if you did not pay an alternative minimum tax as a wealthy individual, then none of you will benefit from all of that. But those tax cuts are permanent tax cuts. And so this is basically a tax scam. Those who see a little bit of money, average family making $60,000 jointly, might see $1,200 in annually for the first 5 years in a tax cut. So that's basically $100 a month. And you know, I mean, you can use an extra $100 a month. Paul Ryan talked about an extra $1.50 that somebody was earning. So every penny counts, I guess, when you don't have to get something out of it. But anyway, that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. With this tax cut money, they say that it's going to trickle down from the wealthy to the working people. And trickle-down economics has not shown itself to be something that works. And what is expected is that the recipients of the tax cuts will not trickle the money down to working people. What they will do is corporations will buy other corporations, or they will buy their own shares back to increase the value of the corporation, or they will expand their operations overseas. By the way, that corporate tax rate that was reduced from 35 to 21%, that's on domestic profits. On foreign profits, the tax rate is 10%. So that's an incentive for you to relocate your business offshore, because you can make more money paying less taxes. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you add it up. It is not a middle class tax cut; it's a tax cut for the top 1%, and so therefore it is a tax scam. And so I want to be honest with y'all. That's where I stand on it. And now I want to hear from our illustrious panelists. And first we'll hear from Miss Lucia Smil. And you can either sit there or you can come here, whichever you feel comfortable. Okay.
Hello, is this one on? We'll use this one. Good evening. Well, after that, we're just the bearers of bad news, I hate to say. But anyway, I'm not an economist, I'm a lawyer, and I'm a professor of tax at Georgia State. But besides knowing the bill inside and out, I spent a lot of time over Christmas studying the legislation, so I do know a lot of the details. But it's also, one thing I do is, I used to work in Washington, and I follow very closely the mainstream economists and what they're saying about what this bill does in the short term, in the long run, who it helps, who it hurts, and what's projecting out where are we going with our economy. So I just want to make a few comments on that. Before I do that, I want to just tell you a few things about the bill too. But first of all, it was H.R. 1, and they call it the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It cuts taxes for individuals and corporations. For individuals, the rates are reduced, the standard deductions increased, but the personal exemptions are taken away. And that's where, because they take away the personal exemption but raise the standard deduction, for some people that would be better, but for other people it could actually be worse. And it's really going to depend on exactly which segment you're in. So it's very difficult to know how it affects a particular taxpayer. They have looked at the averages and said on average people get a tax cut, most taxpayers. So there's a lot of qualifiers in there. On average, most taxpayers get a cut. But for low and moderate income taxpayers, they're likely to see a small tax cut or maybe pay the same that they paid before. So it's not going to be very big. Higher income taxpayers will get a much higher percentage tax cut, for not just because of the rates, although the 37% rate, that highest rate, it doesn't kick in until you make $600,000. So where they put the brackets makes a big difference. So very high income taxpayers are only ones who are going to pay that top 37% rate. Also, the higher income taxpayers have more investment income and they have more business activity type income, and that's where the real tax cuts lie, the big numbers. For older adults, the effects are kind of complicated. Some will receive, some tax cuts. Many will just be the same. Let's see. A couple of things in the bill that actually help the distribution towards lower or moderate taxpayers. When they first looked at the bill and they scored it, the distribution was so bad, skewed towards the higher income taxpayers and businesses, that they had to put some things in there to adjust the distribution so there would be some tax breaks for lower, moderate, middle income people. So the child tax credit has been increased, and the refundability of the tax credit has been increased. That's a little bit of good news. The medical expense deduction for 2 years, they've made it a little higher. It's a little easier to take it. That's only for 2 years. So, and that's really for extraordinary medical expenses to begin with. But like the Congressman said, the tax cuts for corporations and businesses are permanent. The tax cuts for individuals expire. And they expire like from 5 years to 10 years out. So in 10 years, we're faced with another everything goes away and we start over another political war. And it's just, so there's a lot of uncertainty. So this is, 10 years sounds like a long time, but when you're looking at an economy and how an economy operates, to have this cliff awaiting us in 10 years just creates a lot of uncertainty for all of us about what this is going to do economically. Looking at a few of the think tanks in Washington, the Tax Foundation, which I say leans kind of right, they say it's going to lower taxes and lead to a 1.7% increase in gross domestic product over the long term, 1.5% higher wages, and about 340,000 full-time jobs. They're also saying it could be revenue neutral, which would mean that it won't add any more to the deficit. But the mainstream economists, like the Tax Policy Center and even the Joint Tax Committee, the government economists and the Congressional Budget Office, have scored it and said it's going to lose between $1 to $1.5 trillion over 10 years. And that is where the problems lie with the economy. So any increases we have in GDP could be offset by the fact that this could cause inflation, it could cause interest rates to go up, and so long term, the addition to the deficit is what is going to really put the pressures on our economy and keep it from increasing and cause a lot of the problems that, you know, roll downhill to the lower and moderate income people. It's also, that is going to put pressure with this huge deficits that we're facing. That's going to put a lot of pressure on cutting entitlement and social programs. So they're going to all of a sudden say, oh, we can't have this deficit. And so it's just going to create a lot of pressure for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, food stamps, all those programs that are a really important part of the social safety net. This tax cut really puts them at risk. They're already talking about that now. Congressman Ryan's had a plan for a long time to greatly shrink those type of programs, and this, with the pressure of huge federal deficits, it's going to make it more likely. And there's one really significant change that's difficult to talk about because it's kind of this esoteric economic term, but there's something they did in the bill they wanted to do for a long time that is, to me, it's very significant. It's a hidden tax increase, and it is also going to put huge pressure on the way they treat Social Security and other entitlement programs going forward. And this is just called, it's called Change CPI. What they did is they changed the way that they compute cost of living increases for the tax code. So in the tax code, we have cost of living increases, and those are designed to stop what we call bracket creep, where as time goes on, inflation increases your income, and that you really don't have spending power. So this is designed to increase the tax brackets along with the inflation rate to keep you from having a tax increase. Well, they changed it to this thing called Change CPI. Under Change CPI, cost of living increases are smaller. All right. So one thing that over time, not a lot every year, but over time, could lead to a tax increase with Congress doing nothing. In fact, they estimated that would raise 125 to 150 billion in revenue over 10 years. Just change it to Change CPI. So that was part of the revenue they had to give, you know, the larger corporate business tax cuts. But the other thing I want to leave you with, because we have two other speakers here, the other thing to watch on this is they've wanted to use Change CPI with certain members of Congress and groups. They want to use it to determine Social Security benefits. And if they, and the cost of living increases, if they do that, then slowly over time, you're going to get lower increases every year. Now, they are quite low anyway. I know because I have an elderly mother, and I, you know, watch her finances, and I see how much she gets more each year, and it's not much. But now that they have gone to Change CPI in the tax code, then the pressure's on to move to Change CPI, which is Change Consumer Price Index, to move to Change CPI to determine your cost of living increase in the government entitlement programs, and I consider that to be one of the most concerning items that were in the bill. Anyway, I know we'll have questions later, and like I said, I know the details of the bill, so I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. I'll hand it to Katie Foster.
Okay, thank you. Next we will hear from Katie Foster.
Yay! I heard somebody say, yay, Katie. Hello, everybody. I want to start a different way from what I had thought about doing originally after hearing the first two presenters. First of all, I want to give a shout out to my union family over here. Yeah. CWA, Communication Workers of America. But I want to ask a couple of questions very quickly. If you lost a job or know somebody who's lost a job in the last year, would you stand for me if you can, or wave your hand? All right. Second question. Some of you are a little season, maybe retired. I'm getting ready to retire myself. But some of you are not. I'm looking at the room and there's a diversity in here. For some of you who are not retired yet, do we have anybody in here who's not retired yet? Okay. Anybody in here feel that you may not be able to retire when you hope to? Okay. There's a lot of questions I could ask, but I did that because I wanted to show that even though I'm talking about organized labor, the perspective that these tax cuts that we have on them, we all in this room, no matter what walk of life we come from, we connect. And that connect is the economy. The economy is the bridge that gaps us, the gap that bridges us all. Does that make sense? Yes. All right. I think it was Congressman Johnson who talked about entitlement programs and education, housing, health care. All those things, again, are things that connect us all. They're very important to organized labor. I am a part of the AFL, American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, umbrella for labor unions. So I get a chance to see basically every industry that there is that is a part of organized labor. There are so many attacks now that are coming against us in addition to this tax bill that was just recently passed. There's another one that's going to be coming up in the Supreme Court called Janus versus AFSCME. That is an attempt to for unions not to be able to collect union dues. In turn, that's going to affect the wages of the workers in this country. This tax bill is going to affect the wages of the people in this, workers in this country. There's a campaign that we do called Fed Up, F-E-D-U-P. It's a national campaign that has actually been working with the Federal Reserve Bank. And we have been doing across this country hearings and trying to demonstrate to the Federal Reserve Bank that it wasn't time to raise the interest rates. Because the job market says today, and Congressman talked a little bit about it, the jobs are on the rise. Unemployment going down. But what about the wages? How many people in here do you know who are working 2 or 3 jobs just to sustain or make ends meet? Not to live in luxury, not for a Cadillac or anything, but just to sustain. Now this is what labor feels about this particular piece of legislation. We feel that this tax legislation is outrageous and immoral, and that it has been sold on the basis of a brazen lie, saying that it will automatically create job and wage growth. Yet, corporations and the wealthy will simply pocket the money that they don't need so that they can buy more private jets and vacation homes while the rest of the working and middle-class families drive the buses. We're the nurses, we're the teachers, and we're the families who continue to struggle. America was the victim of a heist. The culprits were the world's richest people in corporate America. And behind the wheel of the getaway car sat the Republican Congress. At a time when big business is already pocketing sky-high profits and the top 1% that has been mentioned so much of earners are seeing their incomes significantly grow, it is confounding why Congress would focus on increasing their wealth at the expense of the country's workers. Working Americans would see much-needed deductions for medical costs ended under this legislation. The bill also caps deductions on local and state taxes, and we heard a little bit about some of the things that are coming, even though we will get some of those things that we had hoped we wouldn't lose before, we still may lose so much. And to be honest, we don't know what we're going to lose yet, because it's a work in progress. And as we move through this process, we're probably going to learn how bad off we really are. This is a tax increase plan for millions of middle-income Americans. Even with the deductions that Republicans have been shamed into restoring, taxes could go up for 87 million middle-class families, including 67 million making less than $100,000 annually. It will strip 13 million Americans of health insurance and raise premiums for everyone else by an average of $2,000 a year. I'm going to kind of skip through here because I don't want to be repetitive and say some of the things that have already been said, but some of these I think bear repeating. Mary Kay Henry, who is the international president of the Service Employees International Union, said that the tax cuts insults workers and families whose taxes will rise while taxes on the rich drop. SEIU members in our communities are not fooled by Trump and Republicans who claim working families will benefit, when independent studies clearly show the opposite. Although members of Congress chose to ignore the voices of their constituents who called, wrote letters, and participated in civil disobedience in protest of this bill. They did not listen. No political party should be able to pass a bill this awful, this unpopular, and this corrupt, and still keep their majority. We have got to vote when it's time to vote. We have to register. Not only do we register everybody in our household, everybody in our church, everybody who comes to this community center, everybody we know. And not only do we get them registered, because registration is only the first step. Sister, tell me what some of the other steps are. When you register, you got to do what? Educate. You got to educate people on why they need to go vote. After you educate them, then you got to do what? You got to mobilize them. Voting or registering is no good if you don't go vote. So I have to say that. The last thing is that I want to share. Extremist leaders, and this is something I want to share that actually came from Reverend Barber, so I don't want to steal his words, but I just think they're worth saying. He said, the argument of these tax cuts that Republicans have used for decades is that somehow this extra money that millionaires and corporations will save will ultimately trickle down to the rest of us. What this presumes is that the short-term gains for the rich and big business will stimulate the economy over the long run because of an increased need for labor and capital. The proponents of this bill have promised us that tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations will trickle down to the rest of us, but not only does history refute this, but this is a tired talking point, and the executives who lead the companies themselves deny they will invest their newfound gains in good jobs that could lift working people in their communities. Instead, companies like Cisco, Pfizer, Coca-Cola have said they would turn around and put their gains into their wealthy shareholders in a vicious cycle of greed. We know our nation has a heart problem when our elected officials would rather fight a war on the poor than war on poverty. This is bigger than any one bill. Legislation like this could only come so close to fruition in a broken political system. Thank you.
We've had a few more public officials to arrive. I want to introduce Councilman George Turner from the city of Stonecrest is in the audience. And also the city of Lithonia Mayor, Deborah Jackson. Last but certainly not least is Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson. My wife, and with her is, by the way, a candidate for DeKalb County Superior Court Judge. This is Judge Jeanette McIntosh Hopewell. Speaking of jobs, there was a headline in the newspaper a few weeks ago. It was Kimberly Clark, maker of Kleenex and Huggies, says tax bill helps fund plan that includes more than 5,000 layoffs. I'll read that again to you. Quote, the headline was Kimberly Clark, maker of Kleenex and Huggies, says tax bill helps fund plan that includes more than 5,000 layoffs. Wow. So, you know, this is what they're going to do with their tax cut. We're gonna do some things, and also we're gonna lay off 5,000 jobs. Now, y'all noticed that Sam's Club closed up. Yeah. Walmart. I mean, they're laying off employees. At the same time, they give them $1,000 one-time bonus, which they write off, by the way. They're going to give you that $1,000 one-time bonus, but then you go back to work making whatever hourly wage that you were making. If it certainly wasn't a living wage. And so there have been other corporations that have announced that they're laying off as well. Toys R Us is another one. And by the way, everybody, Miss Foster mentioned about people driving buses and whatnot. You know, Uber drivers, Lyft, cab drivers, over-the-road truck drivers. What happens when driverless vehicles take over? And you know, they are investing in that technology to bring driverless vehicles. You know, so there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be displaced. And yeah, so that's and then just automation in general. A lot of these corporations are investing their tax windfall on robotics. So when you bring in robots to do the work of 10 people, then those 10 people, those jobs go by the wayside, the corporation becomes more profitable. But I got something to ask those corporate robber barons. What happens when you have a nation of people who can't afford to purchase your products that you are making overseas and bringing back over here for us to purchase? It just doesn't even make sense. So, next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. William Lyle. Would you come forward, sir?
Wow, it's a tough act to follow. So in baseball, I'm the cleanup hitter, so I can just hit a home run and then we'll walk off. In all seriousness, you know, I thought about what Congressman Johnson said, and the other two speakers were very passionate in their views and thoughts. Basically, what I was coming to tell you today was that one of the things we teach in a taxation program, and specifically in my classroom, is to make sure that the students know that they need to own this information. And the way we sort of convey that is we let students know, just like we would let an everyday citizen know, there are two ways to approach tax law. There's the macro level approach, which is, for the most part, what much of you have heard tonight would be focused on. Job creation, job loss, lower incomes as a whole, wage depression. But the other part of it is you have to look at it from a micro perspective. And a micro perspective is, how does it affect me personally? And my guess is, if we have a question and answer session, which I'm sure we will, those are the types of questions that individuals will ask. And unfortunately, when you have such a large room, it's hard to answer 300 different questions about specific tax situations. But what I would encourage you to do is, if you have not already had your taxes prepared for 2017, when you do that, and if you have a tax preparer you trust, ask them to quickly give you an idea of what will happen next year. And if they try to charge you for that, find a new tax preparer. That's a courtesy that I think all of us in the industry should strive for, you as citizens and taxpayers. The other part of it is, when you're talking about the changes to the tax code, don't be afraid to research it yourself to see how it will affect you. I think that one of the biggest misnomers of the entire tax change is that somehow, because standard deductions are going up, everyone is going to see more money in their pocket. And unfortunately, that's just not true. So whether you do have more money in your pocket or you end up having less, own the information. And then from a planning viewpoint, if you're going to get more money back in your pocket next year, think about what you want to do with it. Are you going to spend it? Or are you going to save it? Obviously, a financial professional would tell you to do the saving. I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you what may or may not happen, should you ask me. But I think that those are the types of things that you would want to consider on a micro level. So I know that you've listened to about an hour's worth of discussion, and I'm sure Congressman Johnson wants to give you a little bit more information before we take questions and answers. So I'm going to give the microphone back to him, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay, so we've reached the time where we're going to take questions and answers, but I will tell you today is strange. Donald Trump released his 2019 budget proposal, while at the same time releasing his $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. Because you'll remember the three promises that he made in his campaign. Well, he actually made more than three, but because I'm leaving out the wall. And who was going to pay for it? But he said that we were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. And he said we're going to do comprehensive tax reform. And he said we're going to do a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan, right? And he did say about the wall too. So the wall hadn't come to fruition yet. Wasn't able to repeal and replace Obamacare, but they did when they passed this tax scam. They also repealed the individual mandate, which required people to purchase insurance. But despite that, you still have people who really want to have access to the healthcare system. So I'm not expecting the repeal of the individual mandate to cause a whole lot of people to lose their insurance, but there will be some people who decide that they don't want, or they won't purchase the insurance, even though there are subsidies that help many people to have affordable insurance, although there's a large group of people who did not qualify for the subsidies, and so therefore their insurance rates in the individual marketplace are just going sky high, and we need to really do something to stabilize that, but the Republicans are doing everything they can to destabilize the individual market, but that's only 6% of the health insurance marketplace. So no matter what they say, the Affordable Care Act is alive and well, even though they keep trying to kill it. So they weren't able to repeal and replace. They've announced Well, they've done the comprehensive tax reform, which is really not comprehensive tax reform. It's just simply a tax scam, transferring wealth to the top 1%. And they have not, so tax scam, repeal and replace, oh yeah, and the $1.5 trillion infrastructure, that was proposed today. But while you are proposing a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill, you're also announcing in your budget that you released today a 19% cut to the Department of Transportation. And when you have unveiled your $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan, it has no sources of revenue. And for the $200 billion that you say the federal government will put in, so it's not $1.5 trillion in direct government spending, it's $200 billion over 10 years, so basically $20 billion a year over 10 years, and the rest of the money comes from where?
Us.
Well, state and local revenue. So instead of there being an 80-20 split now, it's going to be a 20-80 split. The federal government, instead of putting in 80% and the local and state governments putting in 20%, he is proposing to flip that on its head, 20%. So he's actually expecting local and state governments to raise the money to fund the $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. That along with private money. So it's a scam, it has no chance of passing, so he'll only be successful on one of the three things that he promised to do. So, do we have any questions? And if you have questions, come up to the microphone up here. And, or can we take the mic? Can we do the Oprah Winfrey style and just take the mic? Huh? Oh, okay, so everybody, if you have a question, please line up. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Congressman Johnson, can you tell us what Congress is going to do to prevent Republican illegal taxes and taxes to win elections in the district, as well as prevent Russian interference in our elections?
Okay, can you state that question again, please?
What is Congress doing to prevent illegal Republican action that gives us favorable results in the election and the midterm, as well as preventing Russian tactics interference in our midterm elections?
Okay, so it sounds like you're talking about gerrymandering, which is the formation of districts that Congress people and state and House legislators run out of. And that's done on the state level. It's controlled, reapportionment and redistricting is controlled by the individual state houses and governors of all 50 states. And so there are cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court now where the issue is whether or not there's a violation of constitutional rights to gerrymander for strictly political purposes. And so that's so in the absence of a favorable ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, the only way to change the redistricting process is to change the composition of the legislatures, state legislatures and governors. So that's something that is not on Congress's radar to fix with a federal legislative solution. Because of course the majority in Congress benefit from the current realities. So Congress is not going to do anything. And then in terms of Russian hacking, the 16 intelligence agencies of the United States all agree that the Russians took actions to interfere with and influence the 2016 presidential election in favor of the winner, Donald Trump. So that is, there's no question about that. The issue is whether or not there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians to accomplish what was accomplished. So the special counsel, Robert Mueller, is investigating that, as well as whether or not there were any attempts to obstruct that investigation by President Trump. So that is a matter that's under investigation by the special counsel. President Trump appears to be winding up to be able to get rid of the special counsel or limit the special counsel in some way. And it remains to be seen whether or not he will be able to do that. And the fact that the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee produced a document, a 4-page document, which purports to prove that the FBI and the Justice Department wrongfully conducted or got a FISA court to issue a warrant allowing them to surveil the communications of Carter Page, who was a Trump campaign official. They're trying to say, with the release of that article, that the whole investigation into the Russian affair was based on misconduct by the Justice Department and by the FBI and Congress. So, in other words, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, permitted that to come forward, and it was released. And so, in short, what's happening is the Republicans who control the House and Senate in the House are doing everything they can to help President Trump impede the investigation against him. That's what's happening right now. So whether or not they'll be able to accomplish that remains to be seen.
Okay, so let me put it this way. Can the Democratic representatives in Congress, without preventing Russian interference, can the Democratic elected officials in Congress do anything to prevent hacking of the upcoming mid-year elections? Because we have the president now.
Because the Democrats don't control the Congress. So, yeah, but we don't control the committees either. So whatever the majority decides is what committees do. That's what comes to the floor of the House for votes. That's the direction that Congress goes in, is in accordance with the majority who control Congress. And so the majority in both the House and the Senate are Republican, and they control it. So, I know you don't want to hear that there's nothing that we can do other than to talk loud and try to preach the truth to the people so that the people understand, and the people then can take action when it comes to election time. But as it stands right now, we have a Republican House, Senate, and President, and a majority on the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. Well, it's up to the American people to wake up, to get educated, and to start voting, and to vote in their own economic interest. Something is wrong with that mic. Let's change the mics.
Again, good evening, Congressman, and I'm so very happy that you're here to present this tax scam or bill to us. Now, my question piggybacks on this previous individual. If we flip the House and Senate, do the Democrats have any specific plans to overturn anything in this tax scam, as well as to assist with the present investigation? Because I seem to remember that when President Obama had the Senate and the House, during the second election, many of his his representatives ran away from him and did not support him with the health plan that he was trying to pass. So I want you to know, if we flip the House, will the Democrats go out there and fight for us, and will they seek in any way to overturn this nonsense? Because that's what it is. And with respect to voting, all of us who are sitting here have to understand and know that we've got to get out and vote during the assembly, the local assembly, and the local council people, because that is the foundation for sending people to the Congress. When I go to vote, I do need myself and 5 other people in my precinct voting. Unless it's the presidential, when we see everybody turns up. But if we don't have the people in the Congress support our president, like we had when we had President Obama, everything that we fight for will just go downhill. And I'm angry. I'm an angry constituent. But thank you very much for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Okay, all right, thank you. And next time, ma'am, put a little bit more passion into it next time.
Good evening, Congressman.
Well, I want to respond to her. And you asked, what will the Democrats do if we retake the House and Senate? I can't tell you exactly what we will do, but I will say that when you have control, you have control. You can do what you need to do. Now, we will still have a Republican president who can exercise the veto. And so if a president vetoes legislation, then it has to be overridden by a 2/3 majority. So if you don't have a 2/3 majority in the House and a 2/3 majority in the Senate to override a presidential veto, then the veto will stand. So that means that Democrats will have to produce, if we're fortunate enough to retain or to regain control of the House and the Senate, any legislation that we pass is going to be subject to that veto pen. And if we don't have 67% of the House and 67% of the Senate, which appears to be unlikely, then that means we're operating in a divided government situation, and that means that you will have compromise. And so, yes, theoretically, anything that has been done, say the tax scam, can be repealed. Just like they were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, you know, the tax scam can be subject to repeal also. Whether or not it would happen or not is a different question. So it just depends on what is taking place at that particular time. But I can tell you this, generally speaking, working people do better under Democrats, and the top 1% do quite well under the Republicans. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Congressman, and I wholeheartedly agree with the previous two constituents. What bothers me is that all politics is local. Some of the amendments and some of the laws and some of the things that Trump has overturned had a 2 or 3 vote count of a congressman. We had 2 congressmen from Georgia that voted on him voted for him and with him every time. Some of those amendments would not have even passed had our 2 congressmen.
Our 2 Democratic?
No, Republican.
We got 11 Republicans.
Right. I'm talking about the ones here in Atlanta, the ones that I know about. The Isaacsons, and I'll just call the name. And Purdue. You know, had they not voted, some of those amendments would not have passed. We need to pay attention to these people locally. Paul Ryan.
So you're talking about our 2 U.S. senators.
Senators and Republicans, to be specific. Paul Ryan took Tom Price to Mar-a-Lago to introduce him to Trump to become the health secretary. Tom Price came out of Georgia that voted against Obamacare, has voted forever not to expand Medicaid, undermining Medicare. Tom Price came from Georgia. Had it not been for these Georgia representatives, we may not have had the mess, because Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't read anything, he knows nothing about history, and this has been documented. The people that are really pulling his chain are Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and those folks that have been there for the last 10 years that vowed to get rid of everything that Obama did. I mean, we need to call it what it is. So what can we do about it as citizens? We can get up, educate ourselves, vote for the right people, stop not voting when somebody that looks like us is on the ballot. It doesn't matter. If a dog catcher is running for dog catcher, you need to vote. And you need to know who you're voting for. That's my concern.
Okay.
It's not a question, because I know you're doing everything you can possibly do. I know the Democratic, what do you call it, your colleagues, they're doing everything they can possibly do. I compliment you, but it's us sitting in this room that really have the power. It is a shame that in DeKalb County, only 19%, I think it's less than that maybe, 19% of the eligible voters voted last election. It's crazy. We're doing this to ourselves.
Do a lot better, and we need to do that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
My name is Lisa Johnson, not related, but I'm very concerned about what's going on in Washington. But at this point, I have a more concern what's going on here in Decatur. I'm here to ask you, what can you do as far as the seniors, and with me personally, my utility bills is out of whack. I live alone in my home since 1999. My utility bills usually run around 45 or most 50-some dollars. Now I'm getting water bills for $500. I'm getting electric bills for $400 and some dollars. And I live all by myself. I've been through arbitration with my water bill a whole year now, and they haven't come to no conclusion what they're gonna do for me. They had me to go out to hire a plumber to come in and do my house check. I had to pay for that out of my pocket. I'm on a fixed income, living alone. I did that, I turned in my papers to them, and I'm still at first base with them.
Okay.
Same thing with my electric.
Okay, what I'd like you to do is get in touch with my office. We'll give you a card for someone from the office. That's the district director right there, Kathy Register. And so Marita Davis Johnson, Commissioner, has just given you her card. And so between our offices, we see what kind of relief we can get for you.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for your thank you for your dutifulness. And I know you're doing the best that you can with what you have. So thank
I'm
you.
on Social Security and trying to make the ends meet.
Yes, ma'am. All right, thank you. I care about people like her. And when you work hard and play by the rules, and you get to the point where you can retire, you should be able to retire with dignity. And so when the top 1% are taking all of the wealth of this country and putting it into their own pockets, it comes at a cost. It's coming out of somebody's pocket. And so we have to level this playing field so that everybody can enjoy the prosperity that America has to offer. It's a shame that we're creating that we're hollowing out prosperity and a good life for the people of America, just so that the top 1% can have more money than they can ever use in their whole life.
Yeah.
It's really greed. And the people who are making that money and just gotta make more, they should be ashamed of themselves. Really should be. Nothing wrong with people working hard, making money. I mean, you should do that. But we need to have the rules so that the playing field is level, so that that money is not captured and retained by the few people on the top side. It's our tax structure that needs to be modified so as to produce fairness. And this tax scam, what it did was just tilt the playing field even more in favor of the wealthy. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, you were speaking about the infrastructure and how the federal government funds 80% and the state funds 20%. When they switch it, are we going to have an increase in our property taxes to offset that amount that they have to work with, that the state has to work with?
Yeah, so property taxes, sales taxes are the revenues that, and income taxes also, and other excise taxes. Basically, I won't get into excise tax, but basically sales taxes, income taxes, property taxes are how state and local governments fund their operations. And so if you shift federal responsibility to the states and local governments, then the only thing they can do is raise property taxes, raise sales taxes, raise fines, forfeitures, and fees, and that kind of thing. And, so everybody is paying about as much as they can pay in state and local taxes at this time. And there's really no way that the states and local governments can come up with 80% of $4 trillion, which is basically what the infrastructure needs are in this country, about $4 trillion. And you're going to shift that to state and local governments. It's just not sustainable. It can't work. So that program or that proposal that President Trump has made makes no economic sense and is dead on arrival. It's a plan, but it has no chance of passing. So we won't have a $1.5 trillion infrastructure package.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the businesses, could the state impose more tax on the small businesses and the large businesses in the state? Are they allowed to do that? Or does that have to go through the federal government?
No, states can levy taxes on corporations, but what happens is corporations hold the playing cards, and so they usually get tax concessions from state and local governments as a inducement for them to locate their activities in the state or local jurisdiction. So that's kind of turned on its head. So if one state doesn't offer them, or if one state's taxes are too high, then they go to the state with lower taxes.
Right.
So you're on a race to the bottom as far as corporate revenues are concerned.
The only way it would work is if every state imposed the
Exactly.
same tax.
And they're not going to do that because they're trying to outdo each other. So certain things have to be done from a federal perspective for the benefit of the entire nation. So President Trump's infrastructure plan is exactly the opposite. It's a race, it pretty much starts a race to the bottom. You're welcome.
Hello, Congressman Johnson.
Hello, and so the lady who said that Trump doesn't know what he's doing, you're exactly right.
Thank you for having a heart for the people. I love that about you.
Thank you.
I love it. My question is there any way that Congress, I don't know what group or organization that has to come up with interact where the clearance of a candidate, I think that would stop a lot of foolishness at the door. If we have some type of plan in action for clearance on any candidate, it doesn't matter what their nationality, color, it doesn't matter what party. There's some good people in the Republican Party. I am a Democrat, proud, but I don't hate Republicans. And they need to get that off the air with the media and people saying this. We're not at each other. You know, there's some good Republicans. But McCain is a good one, for example. You know, they're good people. I'm not going to judge anybody like that. But my point is, the foolishness can stop at the door. If we can interact some type of plan of clearance, I don't know if it would be done at the congressional level or what, but if Trump had his clearance, and it would have stopped at the door if he had to go through the clearance process. So we want people of integrity to come into that office and to put the respect back into the office.
Yeah, you know, the clearance is the American people, and a majority of the voters did not vote Donald Trump into office. He lost the popular vote by about 4 million people. And if you go state by state and tally up the number of Democratic votes for all of the congresspeople in that state versus the number of Republicans, in many states you will find that overall there were more Democratic voters than there were Republican voters, but because of gerrymandering, you end up with more Republicans in the House than you have Democrats in the House. But getting back to your question, to put a group of people in a position to then judge whether or not someone is qualified intellectually to run for office or not, those people are going to be just as, they're going to be just like the American people overall.
You misunderstood.
Okay.
Okay. I'm
What do you
talking
mean by clearance?
clearance. Just like the people that has to have a position, just like we've been talking about Porter
Go through a
office.
CIA or FBI clearance procedure in order to qualify to run?
Background check for the president, the candidate, any candidate that is running.
Or the presidency. You
Exactly.
gotta go through a background check.
Exactly.
That means I can't run for president.
Oh, Lord. But no, but I'm saying really, truly, some of the things that he had.
Well, yeah, the American people, and the point that I want to make is the American people, we have we have the ability to vote our representatives into office as opposed to our leadership being selected by a military junta or a overthrow. So we have a system of government in this country that no other country on earth replicates. It's the greatest form, and it lends itself to freedom. And our people are the freest people on earth. But with that freedom comes responsibility. And so the people have the freedom, the people have the ability to make the choice. Anybody who wants to run, they should be able to run. And it's up to the American people to vote them in or vote them out. And that's the way that it should work. And what we really need is for the American people to exercise that vote more, exercise that right. Someone has said only 19% in DeKalb County last election. That means 79% did not vote. If 79% had voted and they knew what they were voting on and who they were voting for, then our democracy would be much better. So that's what we have to strive for. But I thank you for your question.
Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
I want to thank you, first of all, especially how you love on our young people.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for that, how you make sure that in South DeKalb, they get great information. In South DeKalb, I was loving the fact that pilot took the time out to come to Martin Luther King High School and talk about the STEM program, and especially encourage the young ladies to become a part of aviation. I thank you for that, because there are so many women that are heads of their own households for many various reasons. And when we can empower more women that are head of their households, then more of our kids will become exposed, more of them will become better educated, more of them will become wise so that they can make good decisions in voting people in and voting people out. Now, Salem Middle School has an awesome opportunity to go to Carnegie Hall in March, the orchestra to play. There are 2 buses that they need because it's going to carry 66 students, chaperones, and of course, their instruments. Each bus is $7,000. They have paid for one. We're still needing funds, and I know this is a little bit of a switch, but I have a passion for our youth. And for Salem Middle School to get an opportunity to go to Carnegie Hall is so awesome. I cannot hardly believe it myself. So I'm asking whatever you can do, whatever each and every one of us can do, because one of the things I know for sure is community can handle and take care of community. If we decide to put ourselves to the plow, we can do that. We can do that. So I'm asking if you could help guide that, please, and each and every one that's in here as well, because you have the power to do it.
Well, tell me this.
Yes.
Is there some kind of a fund that's set up?
Absolutely.
And that fund can accept checks and
Absolutely.
cash from people?
Absolutely.
And there's some place to send the money?
Absolutely. I have that document with me.
Oh,
So absolutely.
do you have copies of it so you can pass it out?
If this facility will make copies of some of the copies that I have, outside of that, I don't have that many because I've tried to cover all the areas.
All right, I'll tell you what. Why don't you tell everybody the name of the entity, the website, and give them some information so folks can help.
Okay, I need to get that done.
Okay, all right. And while she's doing that, we will hear from you, ma'am.
My name is Corey Bulwar, and thank you for coming and giving us this information.
Welcome.
What I'm upset about, in a sense, in Georgia, when people try to call us and tell us to call Washington, wherever, we can't get through because of 2 Republican representatives of Georgia. The line always stops, blocked.
The 2 senators.
Senators, yeah, they're always blocked, so we cannot get through. So what would you suggest we do?
Go to the office.
Go to the office?
Yeah. Go to their, find out where
Downtown?
yeah, I think one is out in Colony Square. I'm not sure. I think Senator Isaacson might be in Colony Square. He's in Cobb County. Marietta. Yeah, call our office and we can give you the address. But, you know, send them a letter, send them an email. Get a group of friends and go down and visit the office. That's a good thing to do. Let them know how you feel.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here, Congressman Johnson.
Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if it's far-fetched or not. Have you ever heard of the American people suing the federal government in a class action lawsuit?
Class action lawsuits are filed against the U.S. government as a matter of regularity.
Okay. And I asked that question because it's dealing with Social Security. And correct me if I'm wrong, Social Security in my mind was set up, you worked, you paid into it, when you retire, you're going to get X amount of dollars. Well, what the United States has done, they have stolen that Social Security money that was guaranteed to people that work hard. Now, fortunately, hopefully, I'm going to depend on Social Security. I have a 401k, but I'm also going to depend on Social Security. So you've stolen part of my retirement. I've been working since 15 years of age. I'm now 61. 4 years, I'm on retirement. So, is there any way, I know, dealing with the federal government, that we can, you're stealing what we put into it, what the money was allocated for. You used it for other entities, other things. So what can we do? I know, elected people in the office, it's going to do X, Y, Z, but in the short term, anything we can do against the federal government part of Social Security.
Well, yeah, so you're talking about the Social Security Trust Fund, which
Right.
Which comes out of your wages and it goes into the trust fund, and then what the legislators have done is to take that money and use it in the general fund to fund ongoing government operations. But really, it's like going from one pocket into the other pocket. It's still the federal government. And so the full faith and credit of the U.S. government has been good and has not defaulted on its obligations. And so, don't worry about your Social Security not being paid because you will get your Social Security. Now, when you talk about reform, that means reform for those who are coming after you. And we need to fight for them too. But your money is good so far. The federal government has never defaulted on payments that it owes to people that it owes money to, including people who paid into the Social Security system. Now, we do need to make sure that our government remains able to pay its bills. And so that's why we have, you have monetary policy and you have fiscal policy. So that monetary policy is making sure that everything is stable for the fiscal policy, which also needs to be, it needs to be practical, realistic, and and then we're dealing with foreign governments seeking to replace the dollar as the world's currency. And so we have to be concerned about those kinds of things because they can affect the solvency of America. But because America is free, the people are free. That's what kind of gives us the edge over all other nations. And so we innovate, we create, we push the envelope, we lead the world. And America does not need to lose that position in the world. We don't need to give it away. And basically, when we don't exercise the right to vote, that's what that can lead to. So that's a very extended answer to your question, but basically you don't really have to worry about receiving your Social Security.
Okay, I'm not worried, like you said, for all the people, the millennials and everybody else that's coming up. If they're paying into it, they should also get it. So
Yeah, that's
whatever
right.
we need to do to ensure that happens,
And by the way,
I'm on the bandwagon.
by the way, if the nation is producing fewer people coming into the workforce to support the people who are not working anymore, then that creates a big problem. And so when the American people themselves are producing 2.1 children per family on average, but yet you have people living longer, you're still young, you'll be receiving, and you'll live longer than people were living 30 or 40 years ago. So you'll be drawing more retirement benefits. Those benefits have to be replenished by the people who are coming in working. And so, you know, if we only grow at 2.1% children per family, we're just kind of keeping even, but our expenses are going up. So that's why immigration is important to the nation. So, you know, that's why, so people are talking about cutting immigration. That's cutting our economic well-being for the future. That doesn't make a lot of sense, all to try to keep America white. And that just is not going to, it's
Not going to sustain.
no, it's not sustainable.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Congressman. I want you to know.
Okay, hold on one second, ma'am. So, the gentleman, the two gentlemen, I've been waiting on some men. Y'all will be the last questions, because we gotta close it out. And then I'd like to hear from the panelists for their concluding remarks, if that's okay. And if you want to answer any of these questions, you can do that also. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Congressman.
Hi.
And thank you for being here this afternoon. And thank you for all that you do. And I want you to know that I do follow you on C-SPAN. And I know that you are doing a lot of hard work. And I want you to know that I certainly do appreciate all of that. But my question to you tonight is, how can some of all the wasteful money that's been spent in Washington, D.C. be cut out? I mean, you know, I'm not really criticizing President Trump, but I just think that he is outrageous on the way he spends money. You know, there have been many occasions that he costs a lot of money. And I want you to know too, that I have been tracking this, and Obama out of 4 years had not spent as much money as Trump has spent wastefully. I mean wastefully. And right now, a lot of people might not know, but he want to have a military parade. And that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. That's going to cost a lot of money. A lot of money. And who is it to recognize? It is to recognize Donald Trump, not the veteran. He wants to be recognized. And so, and I go back to, also to the time that all of his professionals in the White House would they would get in the air and they would fly anytime they wanted to fly. I don't even think they even got this consent to fly, but they were just causing a whole lot of money. Mulvaney, Tom Price, a lot of people just thought they could get in them jets and just take off. And that costs a lot of money. And so, I'm concerned about that because you got entitlement and you got these programs that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and I just heard today, that the promises that he made regarding Medicare, Social Security, and the entitlement program is going to be eventually cut. And I heard somebody say earlier that, okay, we're not getting anything. I depend on Social Security. And I know a lot of other people older people that retire, they depend on Social Security. So if they cut, if we're not going to be getting any raises on Social Security, what do we have to look forward for? But in general, my question was, how can they cut down on the spending in Washington, D.C.? Now Trump, and I'm gonna stop. Trump, he had Mar-a-Lago, he had Trump Tower, and he had the White House. President Obama, he was in one place, the White House. So what's wrong with that picture? Everybody in the world knows that he got to have all this security in this place, in that place, and the other place.
Yeah, he's costing us a lot of money.
He wasting money.
And he wants to, I was reading today where he wants us to go to the moon. And I'm asking myself, what for? What do we need to go to the moon for? I mean, it might be a good reason to go to the moon. I can see going to Mars. But yeah, somebody said, can we send him to the moon? That'd be a good idea. I think I might file some legislation on that. But I understand your point, ma'am, and the executive branch with all of the requirements for security and the Secret Service and having to deal with Secret Service for the wife, the kids, everybody. It's a lot of money, and they move, he spent more time at one of the golf courses that he owns than, so it's a lot of money. But yet he is the president. We do have to protect him and his family. We couldn't, we have to do that, and that's just the way that it is. As far as a military parade is concerned, we'll see how that advances. We'll see how that advances. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. So that's my response.
But thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
And do ask Congress, and they cut down on his expenses. I don't believe, now this is me, when Obama was president, I don't believe they would have let him spend that kind of money just wow.
Well, they would have screamed on it loudly, but because one of their own is in office now, it's okay. So that's just the bottom line. Yeah.
Thank you, Congress.
Thank you. And the gentle lady with the from Salem Middle School, you still with us?
Yes, she was passing out.
You passing out? Oh, you want to give us the information now?
Passed it out.
Okay.
She passed it out.
Oh, you passed it out? Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Please. That was a nice little soft sell that she did. Wasn't that was smooth, but thank you.
My babies are working, right?
Yeah, right. Baby's definitely working.
Good
Okay.
evening, Congressman.
Good
And
evening.
I also admire you and commend you on a job well done. I know it's a hard fight, but we're gonna win.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do this.
But I have two quick questions. One is, I'm so concerned about us not being educated about how important it is for the local politicians, if you will, for us to know that if our water pipe break, we're not gonna call President Trump. You know, we're call somebody local. So how can we educate our people to the importance? We'll vote for the national election, but I'm talking about local. Because again, you have already spoken about, it's so important at the local level that we know who our representatives and who our senators or Congress people are. And so I would like to know what advice you would give as to how we can get the message out to the local community of the importance of voting. And also, how can we get rid of the electoral college?
Okay, getting rid of the electoral college will take a constitutional amendment, which would have to go through, I think, 35 states, 37 states, 2/3 of the states would have to ratify it before it could become law. So that's a long process. It hasn't even started yet. It's been something that's been with us since it's as old as the Constitution itself. It is a process that was designed to equalize the power between states that had fewer residents. You know, so in other words, so every state has, well, I'm getting to the apportionment, but basically it was designed so that no state with greater population than another state would have undue influence on who was elected president. So it's something we really need to, I believe that we should have direct voting, and the result of the direct votes would determine who the president would be. That's the most democratic way of doing it. Yeah, it's a long process to amend the Constitution and to do away with that part of it. As far as the state and local elections are concerned and people's awareness of the fact that they should vote down ballot, that's just something we have to keep reinforcing, and I think we do that when we have these community meetings. I know that George Turner and Rob Turner and Diana Doma and Mayor Jackson and Commissioner Marita Davis Johnson, all of them have town hall meetings or various meetings, and so it's important that we attend those meetings as well as meetings like this one, and just learn more about the local issues and hold our local as well as our state and federal officials accountable. Can't do that unless we vote.
I think the churches might be a great source because we have a lot of congregations and all over the world. And if I can get in contact with these people, I'd like to invite them, to come and speak at the churches because, our foundation.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Hank, for coming and your panel. I appreciate everything that you've done, and I'm really have been learning a lot from your conference. I was listening to your conference call, and you mentioned something about the internet, and I wanted to know how far out the changes as far as the internet is concerned, you know that. And also the gentleman there mentioned let's see, Mr. William Lyon, mentioned something about the taxes. And you shouldn't be charged for the tax preparer on a certain segment of it. I'd like him to mention that again. And about the internet, that's all.
Okay, I think probably what you were talking about the internet is net neutrality. And net neutrality was a rule that had been put in place by the FCC under the Obama administration. And then once the Trump administration came in and got control of the FCC, then they rescinded the Obama net neutrality rule. And so just as it took a couple of years for that rule to work its way through the administrative process to become official, it also takes that same amount of time for the rule to be undone. So we're looking at maybe another year and a half to 2 years before that rule would become reality. So meanwhile, there is a legislative solution that is in the process of being put on it. So I believe that the majority of Congress may be in favor of net neutrality, preserving net neutrality. So it could be a part of some legislation that is passed by Congress. So we'll just have to see. Okay, yes, sir.
In terms of your question about tax preparation, there are organizations, for example, AARP, I know, provides that type of service, either at a discounted or free of charge. United Way. Almost all nonprofits that are community-based would be able to point you in the right direction, and if you stick around afterwards, I can give you my business card. I can also point you in the right direction.
You mentioned something about not being charged.
Right, that's what those organizations attempt to do. They basically put you in contact with a preparer that will help you.
Okay, last but not least.
Good afternoon, Congressman.
Good afternoon.
To all the people here, I have information that I can pass on to you. On your cellular device, your phone, you can contact your congressman, your senator, and it's all on your phone using the 5Call app. You can send an email. You can also notify Congressman Johnson any problem that you may have through the internet. Someone in his office will pick up that paperwork and proceed with it. It's called 5Call apps. Last but not least, you know, Congressman Johnson, he have a big hat to fulfill. But I want to challenge each and every one of you, what are we going to do about it? You know, we got to get out. We got to get out, and we got to let people in the community know that we must attend the local community meetings with the commissioners, everybody who has something to do within our communities. Also, Senator Isaacson, Purdue, all those people. You know, you're flooded often with emails, phone calls. Let's aggravate them. If they up there, we're gonna make them earn their pay. And if we're gonna make them earn their pay, we're gonna see 2018. I challenge you to get out and get as many people you can to the poll to vote. You know, if people out here will give a ride. Don't let the weather stop you because it's raining or whatever. I don't care if it's snow on the ground. Let's get to the poll and vote.